Thank you and salam. So let's move now to the first panel discussion. And the objective of this first panel discussion is twofold. First of all, we want to learn how agriculture and livestock can help in rebuilding the livelihoods. And then secondly, we want to hear from some of our panelists, what are their organizations as key players doing to achieve that goal. So it's my great pleasure, and as I speak, please feel free to walk up on the panel to invite Mandefero Nigusi, the CEO of ATI. Please come on up. Mawira Chitima, the country director of IFAD. Please come. Then Namukolo Kovic, the Director General's representative for Ethiopia. Tadesse Kuma, senior researcher at the PSI. And then last but not least, Joyce Maru, the regional director for Africa from SIP. Now, the way we do this is we'll pose 2 rounds of questions, then each of the panelists will respond. Please try to stay within 3 minutes. I have a sense we are running a little bit behind time, and we also want to make sure that we can take a lot of questions from the audience. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us here on this panel. And my first question to you would be, how do you see the potential of the crop or livestock sector to support recovery from shocks and build resilience of households that are affected by different kinds of shocks? That's a long question for 3 minutes, but please do your best. And I suggest we start here with you. Please go ahead.
So, how can crops and livestock support the rebuilding process? Dr. Kitacho raised several questions. Instead of singling out a specific sector, I would say, as ATI, we have an operation area, and we have specialized on crops. And farmers who were affected by the conflict were surplus producers. And they had significant marketable surplus in their areas. And now they ended up with nothing. So the surplus produce, the asset they have in the house, the farmers' institutions, they lost everything. So where is the beginning of responding to this particular crisis was, it has begun from crops. So the immediate response is to provide food because it's an important element. So the next step from relief service is what can farmer produce immediately? These are crops compared to livestock. So what are the key inputs that we can provide? Seeds is an initial reaction to the recovery process or to the rebuilding process. So crops significantly helped in terms of beginning rebuilding the assets that the farmers lost and the livelihood journey that the farmers were hoping to go back to normal. So when the conflict hits, their lives and the livelihood went down. So we're talking about recovery and what is the contribution of crop? Was significant. I can quantify this in relation to what did we lose? The loss was huge at the national level and at the sectoral level because the farmers and the pastoralists are living in the rural area. They were the most hit with the conflict. So the next one is livestock. So crop without livestock in a mixed farming is also challenging. They don't have anything to prepare the land. So the next move for ATI was supporting farmers with hired machineries because they don't have oxes. It's not a partial damage. Farmers lost their livestock, their crops, including seeds. So then we start talking about restocking. So that is the next step. And again, when you talk about livestock feed comes in. So these are the key elements. Okay, you provide crops and livestock to the farmers. How can they sustainably go back to their normal situation? These are cluster farmers, well-to-do farmers. Then supporting the secondary institutions like research, multiplication centers, market sheds, warehouses, and so on, the seed companies associated to farmers. So these are the most important ones. I can talk for hours about this community, but I will stop in there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for keeping the time and for these insights. Now we move over to Namukolo. I'm sure she has a lot to say about the role of livestock.
I do have a lot to say. I'm not sure where to start. I think Dr. Mendefro has already touched on the fact that in a conflict situation, there's a lot that is lost with respect to livestock. So when you've lost your oxen, now you have a problem. Even if you give them seed, how are they going to produce? Then you think in terms of hiring tractors, as they have tried to do. The challenge that comes with that is how many will you reach? And there will always be those that you actually will not be able to reach. So from a livestock perspective, there are multiple issues that we need to consider. One is the issue of restocking. People have to restock. We have to keep in mind, and I think Dr. Getachew touched on the emotional issues, the dignity of people. One of the most difficult indignities of situations like this is when people are not able to feed themselves. It's painful to watch your child die. And often in these settings, being able to give that child a glass of milk would have been an element of dignity. Not being able to do that becomes an indignity in some way. So when you are thinking in terms of recovery, then you have to think of how are you going to stock, what should come first. These are questions that we actually need to address. And I say this because under different settings, we have different ways of thinking. And I want to give an example now from a conversation that I had some time back with a colleague at the Sokoto Declaration. They have these community labs where they get communities to go and visit their neighbors. And the one community didn't think goat milk was something to be drunk. The other community, they cherished goat milk. By moving one community to another, they were able, not the officials of the Sokoto Declaration telling people you must give your children goat milk, but the communities saying we have seen those guys giving their children goat milk, why don't you help us do the same as well? Why am I bringing this up? From a livestock perspective, it's not as simple as we will provide you with some seed. You have to bring in animals. At what age must those animals be? That becomes an issue. Which animals must you bring? Is it goats? Is it sheep? Is it cattle? you have to create some prioritization there. If I have a choice, I would probably give the community oxen first. Because if I give them oxen first, then I can deal with these other issues of them being able to produce a crop for the next season. But I think the other thing that we normally forget about here is the market dynamics. In these humanitarian situations, we need to find a way, and I'm speaking this from a research perspective, we need to find a way in which, as part of this rehabilitations, bringing in livestock, bringing in production of crops, we need to think about market dynamics so that as part of that package of rehabilitation, the market dynamics must be part of it, because that's what is going to help people find their feet and begin to see what they are going to do. If you think about market dynamics, your decisions on which animal to give, poultry usually are found to be very accessible because of the fact that they go to maturity so quickly. So that usually is a very good one to start with. But you need to think about the specific context, and within that context, think of what is best, but connect it to market dynamics so that you don't create dependencies that could actually be addressed simultaneously.
Great,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's just go straight over to Joyce. 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Clemens, and good morning all. So I think what I'm hearing is to say that we need to rethink how we are really enabling these communities. So we need to rethink our food production strategies. So ask ourselves, like, why are we going? Every time a crisis or conflicts happen, these communities are not prepared. So we end up then being so reactive and having interventions that are just very short-lived. So, and please don't misunderstand the fact that whenever these conflicts happen and emergencies, we need to respond, we need to provide immediate solutions. But then we also have to think about the long-term strategies. And whether it's the crops and livestock, it is about diversification and giving these farmers options and making them better prepared for when these crises happen. So I see that it's a very, very important way that we need to rethink in terms of our food production, food systems. I'll give an example, for example, of the crops, and forgive me because I work for the International Potato Center. So I'm gonna talk about the role of the root and tuber crops, because luckily in Ethiopia, these crops are now incorporated into the National Crop Package for Emergency Response by the Disaster Risk Management Agricultural Actors. And I think the reason for this, in the past it used to be grains, but now they are recognizing the need for diversification and introducing these crops that are quite versatile. For example, if you talk about the orange flesh sweet potato, it's a very good crop for these communities. So you find that apart from being a food security crop, there's also the nutrition angle that is involved, what Namukolo was saying. Maybe you cannot give a glass of milk, but you can think of these staples that are quite nutritious. And in addition to, in terms of the adaptation and resilience building, the advantage with these crops is that they are early maturing. So whenever disaster happens, CIP is working with local partners in these regions to provide seed, and because within 3 months, farmers then have food because they are early maturing, but they're also nutritious. But not in addition to that, it's also food for the livestock. So these crops are very versatile in terms of how they can be utilized by farmers on the ground. I think the other advantage is the input, because sometimes we also don't have time or the resources to provide the input. So crops like the sweet potato, they don't require a lot of inputs. So again, it really helps the farmers to adapt to some of these crises that they are facing. So I think that is one option, that we are working to provide seed in terms of emergency, but we are also looking at the long-term sustainability of this intervention. So We were discussing the other day to say, why do we have to go in every time there's crisis? We are giving these farmers fresh seed. Some of the solutions we were thinking about is to think about building the capacity of local partners and local actors. Because when crises happen, we don't have even access to some of these areas, but we have a very, very strong testimonies of some of the partners who have continued to, for example, produce sweet potato in this Tigray region, even when we couldn't go there, because the capacity was already built and sustained. So I see that in summary that it is the rethinking of the strategies, is the diversification and the options that we give the farmers, but also thinking about capacity development for local actors and partners to really take it forward. But every time, of course, the CGIAR, we have the new innovations. We need to think about beyond the policy, it's the evidence and making sure that these innovations are available to local communities in times of crisis. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Joyce, also for highlighting the importance of roots and tubers and the longer term perspective. Please now over to you, Tadesse.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank the organizers for providing this opportunity to share my thoughts around the role of crop and livestock production for rebuilding conflict-affected communities. I hope in general, as all we know, crop and livestock is a part and parcel of our livelihood for Ethiopian. So rehabilitating the production and productivity of this sector is a core component of intervention areas. When we come to crop production and its contribution for rehabilitation and also rebuilding the livelihood, as we know, any investment on crop sector has effective trickle-down effect on livelihood millions. Whenever there is productivity improvement and improvement in the access, it immediately affects millions, lives of millions. So any investment has extremely important value for in such situation to improve the livelihood of conflict-affected areas. Besides, as all we know, crop is a major contributor at agricultural economy, at least 60 to 70% of total agricultural GDP, as well as livestock, about 25, 30%. So in general, their contribution is immense and highly effective in terms of rebuilding. Mainly for those not directly engaged in agriculture, it provides income through employment as well. And also it's a food. Lower prices affect millions, lives of millions. So I hope investment on crop has excessive and highly important effect on rebuilding the community's livelihood. When we come to livestock, I hope livestock is for a number of its product and product related incomes, it's highly important one. When we come, it's a highly nutritious, most nutritious food for children, for women, both for lactating and pregnant women. So an investment on this effect is a highly important one. Besides also nowadays, livestock, though its availability and number varies with household income size and family status, it's most important source of income. As indicated early, the areas where we had severe conflicts, majority of households who used to rear livestock lost their livestock. So that means restocking is, as indicated earlier from our colleague, restocking comes in the first place. I hope over and above, The conflict also affected access to medicine for livestock. So protecting animal health is another important area from the perspective of rebuilding. From crop side, I hope we are now PSI are undertaking a large household survey, and we come to realize access to improved variety seeds is really detrimental for success, but it's not really available in terms of quality and quantity. At the same time, access is limited because of its price, highly skyrocketed prices. So in general, as to my understanding, these sectors are very important and as well as crucial. The trickle-down effect is very fast in terms of benefiting large majority. So I hope investment on these sectors could at least resolve some of the immediate challenge at household level. This is what I can say for the time being.
Very good. Thank you very much. Now I can see that there are probably a lot of questions in the room, so please get ready. I will move over to the colleague from IFAD, and then after that we'll go into a round of questions. So please,
Thank
go
you.
ahead.
Thank you very much, moderator, and good morning to all. I think the benefits or the potential benefits of crops and livestock have been well articulated by these eloquent colleagues. And I wouldn't say that I'm here to tell you about those, you already know them. I think I'll take just a minute to say how IFAD approaches this work and how we intend to approach it moving forward. First of all, we do recognize that food and livestock are essential to three main things. They are food, they provide income, and they are a form of assets. They provide forms of assets. And that lack of access to food and livestock will harm these three aspects that I've just mentioned. But we also look at it and say to be able to rebuild after conflict or after any shock, you need to have done a very good job before that. You need to have prepared well. You need to have prepared very well for you to be able to rebuild. And so we pay a particular emphasis on how well are we getting communities to be prepared for a shock, whether that shock is natural or man-made. Man-made shocks are very difficult. Conflicts are not easy. They are very much more destructive, both from a psychological point of view and also from an assets point of view. So it's very, very difficult. I can give you an example that after the cessation of hostilities agreement was signed, I traveled to Tigray, and what we were hoping to do there was to resuscitate our program by doing everything that you have said, fast-track the provision of seeds, fast-track the provision of inputs, and get the communities to start farming again. But when we spoke to the communities, trauma was the biggest issue. And instead of us actually talking about seeds, inputs, farming, crops, we ended up listening to communities' stories of trauma. And that actually really, to me, said, you know, sometimes we rush to bring in all these things. Maybe we should take some time to listen to those people first. We go there, we listen, and we don't start pushing them to start producing crops the day that they think that the conflict has subsided. And I think that is one thing that we really need to think about. And when we started working on it and trying to see how do we get the inputs there, we saw that the inputs needed to be ordered. It would take, from our procurement point of view, 6 months to get the inputs onto the ground and improved seeds. And so we really thought, and this is what we are doing now, which I will talk about later, how do we best prepare for these shocks? And that preparation for shocks is a big contribution that IFPRI, partnering with government, can really do at local level, at regional level, and at a federal level, whether it's policies, whether it's actually physical things that you put on the ground. It's fundamental that we really get that preparedness going on. The other thing also that I just would like to talk about is what Dr. Getchazu spoke about. It's interesting that yesterday we had a discussion in our office on how we actually design our programs and how we really take the humanistic point of view and how we consult communities as we design these programs. And we came to one conclusion that we probably do not listen to these communities deep enough. And when we had this discussion yesterday, I remembered what Dr. Germa said when we were at a workshop in Hawassa, and we were talking about communities and resilience. And the organizers of that workshop brought communities on stage to speak about their resilience and how they cope and how they recover. And Dr. Germa, I was sitting next to him, he said to me, this is the first time I've seen this, and I am really highly impressed because most of the time we listen to ourselves. And I think this was also a pivotal kind of moment. We are trying to change how we do our thinking, how we bring in communities to talk about how they recover, how they rebuild. Because whether we are there or not, they will rebuild and they will recover somehow. And this is one thing that I really thought I can say to you. We have a $1.2 billion program in Ethiopia right now as IFPRI. One big thing we are always asking ourselves, in areas where we have invested, how have we better prepared communities to withstand shocks? And is there any area that when we go back to, we can say, if it was not for the help that was given through IFPRI financing, it could have been worse.
Thank you. Can you please
That's
comment
it.
on it? Thank you very much. That was a great set of insightful comments. Now we want to move to the audience. The good news is we have some time. We have 10 to 15 minutes. So please raise your hand, introduce yourself. And where do we start now? A lot of questions here. Let's start with the gentleman here in the middle. I think he raised his hand first.
Thank you very much. My name is Moti Jaleta. I'm from the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center, CIMIT. I agree with the point that the panelists raised that seed is the key issue as an intervention point to rebuild livelihoods in conflict-affected areas. But I would like to hear from you more on the strategies to follow, in getting this seed to farmers. Sometimes even we might not have enough seed in the country. Are we going to do some kind of rationing or redirecting seed from their potential areas to these conflict-affected regions? And also, how we can coordinate with the effort that NGOs are having in getting seeds. Sometimes might be killing the seed business when we are giving seed for free to farmers. Maybe voucher systems might really help. Thank you.
Great, and thanks for keeping it short. Also, maybe just the gentleman in the front, and then we move over here.
Okay, thank you very much. And I really appreciate the panelists. As we are thinking of long-term resilience, how do you see the humanitarian development peace nexus, which we call it triple nexus, which is a convention? So do you think of this would be an instrument to enrich to this level? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Laude Bisha. I'm working for ICARD. First of all, I appreciate what the panelists have said. But even going before distributing the seed or oxen or what have you. In a nature, I mean, conflict itself is disruptive, as has been said, and we are living in a conflict situation, as has been mentioned during the opening statement. What really needs to be done at a national level, how we can create a strategy responding to such situations? What mechanisms, coordination mechanisms should be there before we go to the issue of interventions? Thank you.
I'm Alam Haile from the same institute, ICADA. I heard Joyce and Muari talk about preparedness, and I was wondering, do we have an early warning system, preparedness and action for conflicts? I know that occurs in drought-affected areas. For drought, we can prepare. Do we have such system for conflict, pre-conflict?
Well, it's Malaku, livelihood and productive inclusion consultant from the World Bank. Well, many of the issues actually, except from IFAD, recognizing as a critical issue on the ground, I found some of the issues are actually mentioned what we know before. For instance, restocking. Really, is restocking in highly conflict-affected areas actually the right option in terms of also cost effectiveness. Second, restocking actually matches with the environmental situation in drought-affected areas. I mean, in conflict, environmental stress is also very, very critical. Really, to what extent we are considering. Third point, actually, to the organizer, I'm a bit confused when we talk about rebuilding of livelihoods. Are we talking restoring what they had before, or rebuilding of livelihoods better? Because we need also to consider actual as opportunities of those situations for new system and innovations, instead of just talking what we know before.
Thank you. My name is Janus from World Vegetable Center here in ILRI. In conflict-affected communities, there is a huge amount of, I have observed that, huge amount of money within 6 months of intervention. And the areas are also repeatedly supported that will create dependency and without supporting the local seed production. So I have observed the gap there. Most of the humanitarian intervention do not do assessment of whether their crop-related or livestock-related interventions are feasible or not feasible. So in conflict-affected areas, then maybe seed availability, accessibility, or supporting the seed system. So we should assess first before intervention of activities. And there is also a gap of monitoring evaluation after intervention. So we should focus on this areas.
Thank you. My name is Masai from the World Bank. So my quick question for the panelists would be around addressing displacements in the context of conflict and how your sector can actually address this issue. The complexity of conflicts often is in Ethiopia, it's followed by huge displacement. And I do believe that there has to be a different approach to handling the case of internally displaced people in terms of integrating them in the mainstream development activities. So what adaptation mechanisms are you looking for in this regard?
All right, this is a very rich set of questions. Thank you to all of you. So now I would like to ask the panelists to just pick one or two that's probably closest to what you're doing. And you have 1.5 minutes each. Thank you very much.
Thank you. These are important questions, at the same time tough questions. So the way we deal with seed, so our operation area is very narrow. ATI operates in the agricultural commercialization cluster woredas, and these are 300 woredas in the entire nation. In these woredas, what we are working on is to bring back the livelihood or the farming community back to their original position, back to commercialization. It's not anything else. And the primary input to bring this conflict-affected farming community is providing seed. Of course, I said, food comes first, and that's not our operation area, and that's not our expertise. So we coordinate with those who are providing relief services. Then in 3 months' time, beginning from home garden crop seeds all the way to field crops, it supported a lot. And we provide 2.5 tons per year in this war-affected area. And this war-affected commercialization cluster area are in the eastern part of Amara, in the northern part of Amara, in the entire Tigray, and west and northwest of Afar. So the point is, can we provide seeds, farm machineries, and other services only to commercial farmers or cluster farming communities? It's unethical if this woreda is cluster woreda and the neighboring woreda, but they both were affected with the conflict. But it's very unethical, though we provided both the commercial clusters and the non-commercial cluster farming communities. So I think the key challenge is not about addressing the seed demands. For hybrid, yes, it's an issue, but for varieties that you can recycle with the farmer, farmers will submit what they have taken, and that is being recycled to the neighboring farming communities.
Thank you.
Probably one last point I would like to highlight related to CGIAR. You all work with national programs, national research centers, and you work on upstream research. And those are downstream researchers as well as research institutions. If you can support them, they lost their germplasm, they lost everything. So if you can support them with the genotypes that you have, what they released from your gene bank, that can help a lot. That's what I would like to say. I think that's enough.
Thank you. Yeah, that is enough. And remember, the good Ethiopian coffee is waiting for us. So please, Namukulo, please keep it short.
Okay, I'll try not to hold you from the coffee. I think very quickly, the issue of feasibility being important is an area where research can play a role in terms of helping doing quick feasibility studies so that you can inform how people respond. Then I think the humanitarian development peace nexus is really critical, and it is important as we talk of, for example, the idea of restocking. The restocking is not restocking for the sake of restocking, but that should be thought through carefully so that it actually contributes to that humanitarian development and peace nexus bit. We have to remember that when we restock, then we must take into these environmental challenges into account so that that restocking results in better outcomes than before the conflict. But one of the things that I want to just touch base with is the issue of the emotional impacts and the issue that Dr. Chitima brought up earlier on listening. That listening should be part of the feasibility that we do in making decisions on how we proceed with the recovery and the rehabilitation bit. And then just finally on the role of the CGIAR, we have had, for example, interactions with the Ethiopian Institute of Agriculture Research and other regional research institutions to see what we can do to assist. I can actually, hopefully I'm not taking your flag here, but I know that SIP has actually helped with providing seedlings to help with the potato bit in Tigray. So these are things that we can do. The other thing is we are currently exploring how we could even repatriate some germplasm from some of our international gene banks to help with the recovery process. Thank you.
Thank you, Namkolo. You didn't take my, I hope this works. You didn't take my limelight. I think that it's better said by somebody else. Thank you. So I will talk about the seed and our approach. We already said that we try to restore lost seed, and that's more like a reactive approach. But what we are trying to do is to say, how can we build the local capacities so that the local people at local level, they have the capacities to have the clean quality seed. So we are really thinking about working with partners at the local level, at national level, because this is where we go wrong sometimes, trying to really say we can go all the way to the farmers. We can't, we don't have the resources, we don't have the time. We can't have access in conflict situations. So some of the focus that we have is to say, how can we strengthen the local seed multipliers, the nurse, so that they have this clean seed in their stock, and they can be able to really make it available to farmers at local level. But I also like the question of somebody asking, how do we rebuild better? Because this is usually the problem, actually, not just in Ethiopia, but in Africa. When crises have happened, we collapse very quickly because there's already something weak, and therefore it just needs a little bit of force and it collapses. Think of a house that's not constructed very well, what happens? So we have to rebuild better. So whenever we are thinking of interventions, we have to say, how do we then do it better? So when it comes to, in the past, we were just giving seed and letting farmers produce, but now we are saying, no, for sustainability, local capacity is very important. Early generation seed has to be done in these regions where we are working, so that we don't have to be the one always intervening. We can move on to other things, hopefully. I also wanted to mention that the idea of listening to communities in terms of resilience, I really like that very much, because we come up with solutions, but whenever we listen to them and whenever they tell us, even these early warning signs, maybe we have an understanding of how they should happen. But when we know the communities, maybe they already know what those early warning signs are and how they see it coming, and how we should then help them from that point of view to then prepare, because it's coming from them and it's co-owned and it's more effective and more impactful and more long-term. I think that's what I wanted to remark around, and maybe one more, please, I'm taking time here. But at national level, I think the idea, this is where now the idea of policies come in. Because the resources are, somebody talked about the resources, but for you to hit it really big, you have to think about the policies that are more effective in terms of the scaling and reaching more people. Because the projects, like now we can only talk about a few people, but when it's coming and it's owned by governments and national partners, I find that is very, very impactful. So as much as we are on the ground at SIP, I really appreciate the importance of producing evidence and coming up with evidence that is showing what is the impact of this work that we are doing, for example, on root and tubers in Tigray, and how can that inform policy and government in terms of when they are designing the long-term interventions that are more sustainable. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. I hope questions were all are informative and wonderful. My intervention will be only on two issues. The first one is related with Dr. Moti's question in relation to seed. I hope it's already answered, but just to top on, I hope the major area of intervention should be not rationing rather than building local production capacity. We have existing capacity. For instance, if you take a cultural growth program, we have community-based seed growers association. They produce immense amount of seeds. It may not be C1, but C2, and these are really potential producers at national level. The major challenge is market even for them. So I hope encouraging these groups would provide good opportunity to have enough seed for those in the conflict-affected areas. And also it's like building capacities of local entrepreneurs. So that is one issue. The other issue is issue of long-term resilience building. I hope national development is not a development that we can achieve within a few years or few time. It requires long-term intervention. Mainly the building capacity of farmers at local level is very important. Whenever there is shock, immediately as they don't have enough capacity to cope, always they fall down. So building capacities at local level for large number of producing communities would be one of area of intervention. So far there has been efforts to build a local capacity of producing communities, but more has to be done given the situation we are facing. The other concern about dependency, because of this emergency aid related supports, it's true. Dependency is a severe backfiring effect. So maybe instead of food aid only, development aid is very important aspect. For instance, there are small business firms who lost their business. They need some amount of money as seed money to restart their business again. And they lost some of their production materials, for instance, small processing, whatever. So supporting development-oriented interventions is another area in addition to food aid support. Indeed, food aid support is not such something which we can leave it, but because we have to live the lives, protect the lives of majority. Mm-hmm. So food aid is there, but it's not long lasting. So we have to think about development aid to build the capacities of local business communities.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, please try to be short.
No, I'll be very short. Thank you very much. And I just want to talk about long-term resilience building. There was a meeting last 2 weeks ago where there was a presentation from Ministry of Agriculture which said this statement: Ethiopia has achieved national food security, but not yet household food security. And we had a very big discussion around that statement. Exactly what does it mean? In the end, in my own interpretation, it probably means that there are some areas where there is surplus food production, and there are some areas where there is deficit food production. But there is no movement of food from those surplus areas to the deficit areas. That was how I interpreted it. And how do you solve that? You solve that by really building infrastructure, by really facilitating movement of goods and services. And as long as we have poor infrastructure, as long as we have poor rural services, I think it will be very difficult to actually achieve most of the things that we aspire to achieve. So long-term resilience, in my view, goes hand in hand with the building of good institutions, services, and infrastructure. And if you look at we have a program which we are financing with the World Bank on the lowlands. And over the last, I think, about 20 years or so, it has been investing a lot in community-driven development, allowing communities to actually look at their local situation and identify investments at a local level. But now the realization is that we need a lot more strategic investments in infrastructure, investments in commercial entry of commercial entities, investment in a lot of other things that probably at a local level communities may not think about. So a combination of the strategic investments and community-driven effort will actually, hopefully in the long term, produce long-term resilience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wow, that was a very rich discussion here, and I think we've learned a lot. And one of the things is certainly that conflict is probably the most traumatizing thing that can happen to any human being, and whatever we do, we should take this into consideration. In addition, there are a lot of technical solutions that are also important, and I think it was also quite clear how research can help in the rebuilding process. Now, I have one final request, which I can't say no to, since Namukulo is our host here at the ILRI Campus. So I'll give the floor to you for the final words, Namukulo.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to make one comment. In the context of the humanitarian development and peace nexus, we must not forget the strategies, initiatives, and programs we already have in place. Because some of these programs already have tentacles in the regions where we are trying to rehabilitate. So let's not forget that we have a food systems resilience program. Let's not forget that we have a lowlands resilience program. Let's not forget the food systems transformation pathway and other multiple initiatives. We need to look at them as we seek to rebuild. We need to carry those along with us as well, because there's some elements in there that we can actually build on as part of the rebuilding process, so that we don't lose some of the momentum that we have already built, but also so that the efforts that we make to rebuild are not disconnected from the broader developmental process of the country. Thank you.